Hey folks, how's it going? It's Juno. A thought I often have is about technology. I often wonder if someone was to just go out with knowledge, with the knowledge of what technology is, how it develops, and with some sort of genealogy of the technologies that have come before the ones that we know now, from basically the very beginning up to now, how long would it take them to go through all those iterations to create something truly complex that we have today? So this example in my head is a lot of people have seen the YouTube video of the guy who goes out and he like builds a house out of nothing but mud. So he goes into the forest, he finds sticks, he uses the sticks to dig up some mud, he makes a small furnace out of like a kiln in the mud itself, and then he gathers wood, starts a fire, bakes the mud, turns it into bricks, turns it into tiles, uses the sticks to build a small frame, and then so there's some sort of progression. And I've often wondered, how far could you get doing that towards the modern level of technology we have? Because it seems apparent that that is the circumstance in which humanity found itself originally, and it is through these incremental steps that we have achieved the level of technology we have, um, nuclear reactors and things like that, or something that's finely machined and complex and transistors of a microscopic size. At some point, somebody must have incrementally added on to the point we're at now, but it would have at some point begun with someone in the mud with sticks and stones. And yeah, so I'm really curious, is it possible for someone to go and do that? To start in the mud with sticks and stones, but as long as they have the knowledge, they know the progression, and they know every technological step that is required by a previous technological step, and can do it in a succession to the point where they then are building like an MRI machine or something like that. Like maybe that's an extreme example, but if they had access to the resources, merely the basic resources that humanity had, would they have been able to, in a single lifetime, or what span of time would it require if you had the knowledge pre-installed in you of what to do and how to do it? You merely just had to will it into being with the resources around you. So this is an interesting concept for me to think about sometimes, and I try and follow the steps logically in my head of what I might do, but inevitably I come to some conclusion that it seems almost impossible. It seems almost impossible to go from sticks and stones to a satellite. Like somehow it seems like too much, but clearly it isn't. Clearly that is what's happened. That's what has been done to some degree. It's just that it's been expanded on by over such a long period of time that it seems unrelated when it is in fact related. So this brings me to the picture I'm looking at right now. Um, Someone mentioned how it's some sort of anniversary of the Battle of Agincourt, and there was this reductionist meme about like, who's gonna win, a bunch of peasants with strings and sticks, or the like half the French nobility in forged plate armor. And I thought that's really interesting because it the inference there is that there's some sort of technological leap happening. That the sticks and sting the strings and sticks is some sort of technological leap above like just the hard metal, and it's able to overcome the the nobility. These actual sort of supermen for their day because they are the most educated, lifelong training. Um, they're surrounded by people like them, sort of in a good culture for fighting and for being good at fighting, and yet they're basically being beat by farmers with these sticks and strings. Um, and sure, you can convert that into some other meaning and say, well, that's only one contributing factor. They also had like there was something strategic that was better, and maybe there was other elements involved. But as far as I understand, it does seem to be that one of the main contributing factors was this specific technology that was so adept in what it did that it was able to overcome quite significant odds. Now, this picture here does actually show you that there isn't a lack of technology on the opposite side, like forged armor and crossbows is clearly like technologically advanced to some degree. So why is it that this other technology proved to be so so well adapted to the situation that it provided such a large advantage? And I think that's a very interesting question. And I am curious as to how this is possible. But I'm trying to infer from reality what the causes are. Right, that's the problem. But I don't know if it's an isolated example. I don't know if it is isolated. We clearly see in other situations that a technological advantage clearly outweighs a numbers advantage, or like a cultural, some sort of cultural benefit derived from like a warrior class that have their behaviors specifically honed in the martial disciplines, yet they are overcome by some sort of like technological advancement that it essentially erases those contributions. So I find this interesting, and I'm curious to know, ultimately, are all the behaviors that you can cultivate in yourself essentially subject to the same vulnerability from technology? So there's no set of behaviors that you can ever, no matter how virtuous the behaviors were and how well you developed them, they could never offset a specific technological development that counteracts them in some way or supersedes them in some way. And I suppose in some way that's what Agincourt represents to me. That might be the case. That you can you can spend all of your time developing technology in the wrong direction, and then one specific technology that isn't even that advanced but is entirely in the correct direction for the circumstance wins out. And I love this idea of looking at it reductionist in a reductionist fashion, like the memes do. Like they're just they're just muddy boys with like twine and stick, and it kind of makes sense. Like you can reduce a lot of technology to that. I think if you wanted to reduce a firearm to its basic component, you could say like spicy dust and metal tubes or metal straws. Like it's sort of that if you distill the element in it that's the functional part and try and figure out, well, exactly what is it when it's reduced down to its simplest component, you can view a lot of technology in that way, and I think that's hugely interesting, and maybe even hugely beneficial to the way that you address the issue, that you contextualize the problem of describing technology. Is that if you can begin to put those things into the most simplistic forms and combine them correctly, you can begin to see its actual function and utility in a more apparent way. But I think this brings to bear a very important question about, well, is there any other combination of simple items like, spicy dust and a straw, or, twine and a stick, that we have simply missed, that we just haven't even thought about yet combining in that specific format, that then will result in some other paradigm shifting technology? And I suspect there probably are. There probably are a number of configurations of things that we haven't yet considered that are transformative in their nature. This really boils down as well to just any type of maneuvering, any type of. I mean, look at wrestling, for example, or jiu-jitsu or something like that, where the actions that you're taking. I may have done a video about this before, but if not, the actions you're taking, you're essentially just configuring your body in a certain way in which your configuration supersedes the configuration of your opponent in some way. They're broadly the same base components, and in fact you could be at a disadvantage if you just looked at the base components. The other person could just be stronger than you, have more muscle mass, or be faster or be quicker in some way. But if the configuration that you're making, or that you're able to complete in time, is one that actually puts a direct disadvantage on the configuration of their body in some way, like it impedes airflow or blood flow or something like that, then you can succeed in the specific task of disabling that individual, of reducing their ability to continue. And I think that's a really profound thought in some way. Not to be pretentious about it, obviously, but for me at least, it's kind of profound to think about that it's merely just the organisation that matters. To some degree, the raw materials are almost inconsequential. Not quite. You still need to have some presence in reality to work with. And clearly it does provide you with an offset and a leeway. The more materials you have, then the more ability you have to configure. But there are only perhaps a limited number of configurations that are going to be successful. And acquiring the quickest, acquiring in the speediest manner the best configuration is what's going to succeed. And you could say that about, like, what differentiates a master from an apprentice? Is it merely the fact that, if we again look at the grappling situation, that the apprentice could form the same configuration of his limbs as the master could. Like, there's nothing physically preventing him from doing that, but it's the sequence, and it's the speed, and it's the way in which that end form is constructed, like the route that leads up to it. The master is conscious of it and is directing the flow of whatever interaction is going on in a way that ends in that state. Like, he's somewhat conscious of that being the goal and that being his method in it. Whereas the apprentice probably isn't. And even though he could physically assume all the same positions and he could do the same actions, if he isn't conscious of that's what he's doing, in some way he almost can't succeed, because he's relying on some sort of random convergence in that regard, and that is a low probability event. But potentially he could, and is that the only distance? The only distance that he needs to cross is to know that these are the shapes that he needs to attain and find a way of doing it. Because it isn't simply, obviously, the knowledge of the final form, it's the knowledge of how to get to the final form when you're being actively resisted. And so you want to, you need to move a certain thing into a certain place. Forcing it yourself is one option, but maybe having another thing impact it so it does it on its own, or something else influences it to do it, might be another way of achieving the goal. Anyway, clearly wrestling on the ground and coming up with paradigm-shifting, disruptive technologies probably are two very separate endeavours. But I suppose, in a way, all things that are created are organised from things that are already in existence. And if that's all it is, the reorganisation of things, so that they acquire new functions, or perhaps subjectively new functions in a certain environment or scenario, then really that opens up the scope of what is possible to basically nearly anything, because you just need to figure out the new configuration and actually apply it some way. Either, again, by your own brute force, somehow applying the configuration, or finding a way in which something else has already applied parts of it, or most of it, or all of it, and simply drawing on that resource in a way. Alright, well, let me know what you guys think. Thanks very much for listening. Have a great day. See you later.